This video is a continuation of our series on how do I quilt the quilt. What are some ideas? How do I get ideas for quilting the quilt? I'm lost. We're going to look at Debbie's little wall hanging that is 11.5 inches wide by 29.5 inches high, and it is mostly applique. Everything in here is applique. She's already added some embellishments, and I'm going to presume that the Winter Blessings is hand embroidered. What would we do with this? The first thing I want to talk with applique is that, there we go, we want to make diligent use of stitching around the applique in a very, very tight manner. Now some people, if you have a ruler work foot, some people will use a small little ruler like this. This is, I believe, the BFF from Linda Herka with the quilted pineapple. It's very small, helps you get around curves and just guide your hopping foot. I tend to do my stitching around the applique somewhat slower and freehand, just around the edges. So what this is designed to do, and I do have black, so that's perfect, is to go around your applique very, very tightly around the edge, and it makes the applique become a part of the little quilt, whether it's big or small. It becomes a part of the quilt rather than raised in the air. And I actually saw this in action on a quilt that had boots on it. So it had some of this going up in a kind of towards a point here. And a lot of the boots were not, they were applique, but they were not stitched close to the applique. And what happened is it was, let me get up here to show you, it was kind of this design. And what happened is it couldn't get up close to the applique with that. So I was asked, why is there all this bunching? There was heavy bunching in that quilt. And it was a large quilt, but there was heavy bunching. There was not the, they did not go around the applique. So when you go around that applique, it already gets things laying down nice and tightly. So even though this may be a slower process, you would be surprised how quickly it goes by just going around the edges. Now, if I had a large quilt, and this was, maybe there were several of these spaced around throughout the quilt, I would probably make sure my quilt was laid flat, or if you're on a long arm, make sure the backing's good. And I would choose one of two ways. I would go through each one of these and stitch around them as a unit, doing everything around there together, and go to the next one and just make sure that that backing was nice and flat. The other option, and then go and do my quilting throughout the rest of the quilt all around these designs. The other option is to pick out an area and where this would be at and stitch around it and then quilt just that area, make sure everything's laying flat, and then go to the next one. But you do want to make sure that your quilt's going to lay flat on the back as well if you have something like that. So most commonly you might see leaves or flowers that are spread out. What I often will do as well, and it's hard to explain because that's not what this is, but say I have some flowers interspersed. I'll start quilting, I'll quilt over to a flower, stitch around it, quilt some more, and stitch over to the next flower and quilt around that as well. So different options for you to do, but the most important idea is to remember that we need to stitch around those. Now, if we have applique that is more than a few inches, we might want to do something inside of it as well. This piece would be an applique, this would be an applique, this would be an applique, the hat as a whole would be an applique, probably the tree as a whole would be an applique. If we have a large area that is going to be unquilted, then we might want to do some stitching inside that area. For example, if we have a large leaf, we might want to just do a little something inside of it so that even though that leaf is stitched around the edge, everything inside is not poofing up. That's the other thing I saw is someone questioned why is the applique, I had to press the applique down. That's because there was nothing done in the applique, and the applique was probably 8 to 10 inches large. So that's the other thing. When you have something that's more than maybe 4 to 5 inches, depending on the amount, on the type of batting that you used, you might want to do some stitching inside of it. Now, this tree is tall, but it's very slender. So it would not count as needing that necessarily as long as you stitched around the edges of that. If this snowman was very large, which is obviously not that large and each piece is separate, then it might need stitching inside of it. This whole unit is 19.5 inches long. And I'm going to guess, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking these are 1 to 1.5. So that's 3 inches. This is probably about 2. That's 5 right there. And then 6. So this whole unit would at the very most be about 13 inches long, and each one separate. So we would be okay. Let's now speak completely at this particular piece. We would be fine on this, probably, if we came in and stitched in the ditch on the horizontal pieces, the horizontal units of the piecing, and then stitched in the ditch between the piecing in each of these pieced areas. So we would be between here and then the pieced areas. We might even get away without going in between those. You would need to look at the quilt and see. Then we could stitch around this entire snowman, and so it would be each piece we would be going real close to the edge. Now the other thing I saw was on these, and you want it like I did over here, was on those boots. They started it, but they got outside like this. They were going fast, and so they kind of stopped. But the boots were brown, the background was cream, and they had a brown thread. If they had chosen a cream thread, although it would not have been my preference, it would have been okay for average quilting or just for someone learning and working on things. Absolutely, it would have been fine because you wouldn't have seen it. So you might want to choose the thread that goes with your background fabric, because you're going to be stitching right on the edge of it and you don't want to go inside of it, but you're still stitching on the background fabric. But ultimately do what works so that you're not seeing a lot of threads. A little bit is okay. Don't stress out about that, but try to keep improving. So we would stitch around all of these. Now, what about when we get up and we finished everything? We've gone, let's say we've gone around this hat. And I'm going to try to get a white on, or let's try a green. Okay. And I'm not going to stitch, there we go, that's black. I'm going to go all the way around it. And I'm going to stitch maybe around the edges of these and go like that. That's what the average person would do. what happens if we don't stitch these pieces? We still have the same problem. There's still that raise, and it doesn't have quite the right finish. If we do around the white snowman, but I'm going to assume these eyes are some felt or something, and the carrot nose is a fabric. If we don't stitch around these, we still don't have a real finished looking snowman. We have a face, but it's not got any dimension to it because we haven't stitched around those. So I will normally stitch around everything. I also normally put, and I think these are button embellishments, but if they're not and they're felt, then we'll know that. But normally on the embellishments, I'll put those on afterwards, which these could have just been laid there to show me the whole effect. But the this type of embellishment, now these are part of the hat. That's part of the design, so I would put those on ahead of time. And it could be that these are part of it. That's kind of your choice. But I would go around each part of the hat. I would go in this part by this different color as well, so we got the whole dimension of that hat. And then I would go around each holly berry, and I would go around each holly leaf. Now, if you're using a darker thread, then you could, use that on several different colors. It depends on how you're going to do that. So let me recap that. I told you what I would do here. I would come by each part of the applique and stitch right on the edge, not like I'm doing. I would just have to go too slow to get this exact. Watch where you're going, not where you're at. The same around the scarf, right on the very edge of it, and around this snowman head, but then I would also come in around the nose and all around the hat. As I just said, you could come in the tree right on the edges and then come down on the branch of the tree and keep coming down here, but it would be imperative that you come up and get this point. So get every part of that. Don't leave the point because you got the edge of the tree. You would want to get all of that. And then come down and do the entire bird in the same way to where you get these extra pieces and this part as well. So, and I think there might be something right here, I can't tell. But you want to get all of those little extras because it will make the difference as a whole. Now, if you did no other quilting to this, and this is not any bigger than a couple of inches, quite honestly, you're great. However, if you wanted to, you could go ahead in the background here and add in some snowflakes, or you could do it in here. You could also just do some little loops. And so you could add a little bit in, and you could do just loops around this. But to be quite honest, unless you're really wanting to show your quilting, I think you would be super with just stitching around the edges. But the quilting would look great as well. So join me Friday, and we'll look at some more stitch outs of practice designs that will help you learn control of your fabric when you're quilting.